Welcome, everyone, to Lead Generation World Podcast. My name is Michael Faree. Thank you for joining us again today for a great conversation. We've got Ryan Pombrio of Protect America with us today. Ryan and I go back a number of years, and what's really, really great about this conversation we're going to have is that he's got so much experience from the buyer side, the sell side, and then being in the middle of the transactions where he worked at Active Prospect for a number of years. And so if you're a buyer and want to hear what it's like, dealing with 40 plus vendors, maybe you already know, but you want to hear about what he does, take a look at this interview. This is going to be really, really great. Before I get started though, don't forget, we've got registration open for Lead Generation World Denver. Right now, registration is $395. It's going to continue to go up just periodically based on how many registrations are sold. So get it now. We like to keep our prices affordable and our content valuable. So don't forget to register soon. I want to thank our sponsors. We have Digital Media Solutions and Lending Tree sponsoring not only these podcasts, but also the Lead Generation World event in Denver. So thank you very much. It wouldn't be possible without those two sponsors, along with the many other companies that are sponsoring the event as exhibitors and all the other different kind of sponsored packages we have going on. So thank you to all those companies. So let's go ahead and get started. Ryan is waiting for me now to hop on a call with him to talk about lead buying and the lead gen industry as a whole and all kinds of other good stuff. So let's go get Ryan. Welcome to the Lead Generation World Podcast. I've got Ryan Pombrio here with us today. Ryan and I go back, Ryan, maybe 12, 13 years?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Which you used to live in San Diego area, to make Southern California area. Did you grow up in Southern California, or where'd you?
I grew up in a small town on the Central Coast of about 6,000 people.
Oh yeah, Central. Oh, but California though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. So you're now in Austin, Texas, with Protect America, though.
That's right.
What are you doing over at Protect America at the moment?
Yeah, so Protect America is a big national home security company, and I run all of our partnerships and lead generation strategies. So I help sort of manage all of the relationships with our partners and build out our funnels and optimize all of our campaigns and manage a big budget that we spend on leads every month.
Yeah. So you are in the weeds, as they say, as a lead buyer. I mean, especially
absolutely,
especially with a ton of how many lead sources do you guys buy from?
Yeah, that's it varies month over month, but it's probably 40 or 50 all in.
Jesus.
But there's a real bell curve at the top in terms of how much volume is in. But yeah, I mean, I'd say there's probably 20 like big ones, and then 40 to 50 all in that we are running at any one time.
Dang, that's a ton. I mean, when I was buying leads over at LEI, I think we at the most maybe 25, mortgage and insurance lead sources, and that was insane. And we really tried to cut that down. But there is always that bottom funnel that you just are always sort of rotating, testing, pausing, starting, stopping, all that kind of stuff. But that's a lot.
They keep me busy.
So before we get into some of those, things that you're doing there, just generally, sure. Let's just take a walk back memory lane a little bit. We first crossed paths when you were working at a company called LG Technologies. What they were doing, they were selling calls. What was LG Technologies, and are they still around?
They are still around. Yeah, they're still doing good work. So LG was a really interesting company. We did TV and radio arbitrage. So we would put a generic ad on TV. Let's say it's a mortgage ad or something in the financial services space. And then when the consumer would call in, we would route that call to different providers. It was pretty nascent. It was really early paper calls. It was before a lot of people had call tracking set up or were really interested in call leads. And so it's funny. I had a lot of people that just were not interested at the time, like didn't really get it. And then now those same folks are in the industry pitching me pay-per-call 10 years later. So it's definitely sort of come full circle. But yeah, very, very interesting company, very cool sector. And that was sort of my foray into the lead gen industry.
Yeah, because I mean, you're absolutely right. Calls and hot transfers. And that, what year was that?
Would have been oh 09 probably, maybe oh 08.
Yeah. That was right. I guess the double positives were maybe just around that time too, that started doing transfers and calls and that sort of thing. I don't
They
know.
were there. Yeah, we talked to them a few times, and those guys were already active in that space.
Yeah. And so you guys would do the remnant sort of TV and radio, and then drive it to a call. Would those calls go to a call center, or they just go directly to your clients, or just out of?
It typically would go straight to the clients. If they were after hours or in a geo we couldn't sell, we potentially put them to a call center to monetize them into a data lead. But
Yeah.
yeah, they typically would go direct into the call center. And because the TV stuff is so high intent, they converted like crazy. So the CPLs were really high, but managing the TV and radio costs is also kind of tricky. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. But for the customers that worked with us, it was typically their best converting source.
Oh yeah, I bet. And you guys would have like a general, brand or something like that around mortgage, refinance or something, and then drive it all to the, like you said, the specific brands themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is anybody doing that these days today?
They're still doing it. I don't talk to them much. I don't know all the verticals they're in, but yeah, I mean, I see some folks doing that in different sectors on TV and radio, but I think it depends a lot on the vertical and what the demand is based on what brands are buying there.
Yeah, I would guess like more and more people are just, going down the click to call route, right? It's just probably, I don't know if saying easier is the right thing,
It's
but
easier.
is it okay?
Yeah, it's a
And
lot.
I suppose that's a problem, right? Because now everybody's, driving, click to calls or call, what's that sort of marketplace like for you as a buyer?
It's funny. I loved inbound calls. I still do. Certainly, if people are calling in on an inbound process, those are great. But I feel like the growth and emergence of pay per call has really added a lot more risk to lead buyers. So we tested a few sources and we found a lot of the pay per call. The trouble now is you don't know where those leads come from, right? They could be coming from anywhere, or they're co-reg leads that get stuck into some funnel and we never would have bought them in the first place. And so I feel like there's a lot of issue there. And we ran a few different sources where we noticed a lot of secret shoppers. So the calls would all follow the same pattern. They're 8 to 10 minutes long. They stay on the phone just long enough to have some interest, and then they hang up. And it's like, oh, this is a total scam, right? These
Yeah.
leads are going to get compensated for being on the phone with me, and then the publisher's going to make money, but there's no interest in those. And so I feel like that it's, you have to work really hard on those call leads to make sure you're getting what you pay for.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, when it comes to fraud or lead quality in general, and when I say lead, it could be a click, a data
Sure.
lead, a call, or whatever it is. I mean, obviously, as a buyer, you're always focusing on what the campaign is, and then what the end cost per sale is from that campaign, and then managing it appropriately. But when things are sort of gray, as you say, in that you don't really know where a call is coming from, it becomes, I'd imagine, really, really difficult to pinpoint problematic campaigns or sub campaigns, sub campaigns, all that sort of stuff in a campaign. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the old days with leads, right? Because you buy leads and you're like, oh, okay, great. One day the leads quality is good, one day it's not, but you don't have the sub source. You have no idea how to optimize it.
Right.
It sounds like that's how it is with calls. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the Wild West with calls now, where the payouts I think are so much higher than data leads that people are taking their own data leads and turning them into calls just from a revenue perspective.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, it's definitely shifted, but I think I think it's a trick. I mean, one thing I look at on the lead gen side is like the guy in tech I like called Oren Hoffman. He had a really good blog about this called "What's Your Acceptable Fraud Rate?" Right? And so for some people, it might be pretty high. And for some people, it might be close to zero, but it can't be zero, right? The opportunity cost of getting zero fraudulent leads is so high that I would basically just piss everyone off and never buy a lead, right? So like, if I wanted to be zero, it's going to be very tough and I'm going to pay a ton of money. So I have a number, I think it's probably lower than some other folks, but I have a number we try to keep it to, right? Where we want to make sure we're not getting totally screwed. We know there's going to be some bad leads that come in, and as long as we can hit our campaign goals and maybe not get fleeced, we're okay with that to an extent.
Yeah. So with you, what do you identify or bucket leads as fraud? So, because obviously you don't know. I mean, you kind of go, okay, like you sort of had that example of like, oh, calls like they stop at the 8-minute mark every time and they hang up and they go nowhere. Like sort of how do you sort of identify or label fraud, whether it is or not, or how do you label it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really use fraud as a designation, right?
Okay.
I think it's more appropriate to say like an invalid or a non-billable lead, right? So that fraud rolls up into that category, but it could be a lot of different things. And I don't want to necessarily say that just because a lead doesn't convert or isn't great that it's fraudulent. So I think the definitions can get a little dicey, but we see a lot of stuff where it's a placement it's not supposed to be. It's an aged lead. It's coming from some new funnel that we've never seen before and isn't brand approved. I think there's a lot of variety of different leads that come in that maybe don't meet the criteria we'd like to put on them. Yeah. We try to work with all of our partners to figure out the right mix and get leads that we want. We know there's going to be bad leads and people are going to call in and fill out forms for the wrong reason, and that's fine as long as the metrics all back out.
Yeah, because it is a bit of an art and science combined, right? I mean, and that's just because something bad lead comes through a source doesn't mean that they're generally a bad person or marketing guy or they're really trying to deceive you. To your point, there's a certain percentage that's just the nature of the internet or online and all the crap that takes place online, and it is what it is.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before too. I mean, one thing that I think is a big issue is also just that funnels have gotten so good that it's really easy to opt in and it's really hard to find more information, right? So if you look at a lot of landing pages or anything on search, it's a no-nav page with a form and almost nothing else. Like you can't get to the pages that explain how the product works and that, so people I find sometimes, they'll opt in because they want more information, not because they want to buy something. So,
right.
We're really trying to balance helping to educate consumers because we get people that call in and it's like, oh, we absolutely do not have what you want, right? You should talk to these guys or those guys, or they're looking for something else, but there wasn't enough resources for them to figure that out and sort of self-identify with where they should go.
Yeah, and I guess maybe people are playing a little fast and loose with their phone number because they know they're not going to pick it up, and their email because they know they can opt out later. I mean,
sure.
I don't know.
We it's interesting. We haven't seen a ton of disposable email, or I guess I'd say we see less than I had expected when looking at the data, but we do see a lot of bad phone numbers, and I sympathize. We've talked about this as well, but I think a lot of consumers, 10 years ago probably would have gladly given up their phone number, but now are very concerned that they're going to get 100 robocalls from 500 different companies. And if you bother reading the privacy policy of some of these forms, that's probably what's going to happen. And so we do try to help consumers who have an interest and we want to communicate over, text and chat and email and call center in whatever way they want, or if they want to buy through e-commerce, fantastic. We can help them that way, right? We don't need to get them on the phone, but ideally they're trusting us enough to give us their information if they want to know more. But yeah, we do see a fair amount of that where people are just maybe interested, but not interested enough to give you their real information.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that but within 10 minutes here, I think we've talked about a bunch of topics that I would love to dig in deeper because they're so great. One of the things, back to fraud, and I don't want I don't like to make everything about fraud, but to some point, it is important to talk about it so that people that are out there buying these can maybe spot here and there, and back when I was buying leads, you could spot IP addresses and blocks of it, and you can find contact rates that are 0 to none. You know,
Right.
like there's little things that you can do.
Mhm.
But now you know, obviously people are more sophisticated. Thank goodness we do have products like Anura and you know, Impact has forensic and all these different, you know, products that can spot fraudulent activity online. But when it comes to calls, I want just for a moment go, you know, how are people sort of identifying fraudulent calls in those terms? Because just to add on to that, you know, we all have heard stories and we all know of secondhand stories of companies, you know, buying, you know, what are those cell phones, you know, and having them
Yeah.
sit and filling out things and then picking up the phone and going, yeah, I'm interested, but call me back later, and then hanging up and throwing it away, never, you know, getting anything out of it. So is that part of why you don't like calls, or you kind of like, I don't know if you really, I may have been putting words in your mouth, but so two questions, you know,
Yeah.
how are you are there tools out there to help, you know, identify fraudulent calls?
Yep. So yeah, actually, and maybe you should call this a fraudcast now. If that's
Yeah.
but you know, there's a couple different mechanisms, right? None of them are going to be perfect. None of them are going to get everything, but our goal is to get it within acceptable levels. So we love consumer generated inbound calls. You see our listing, you want to talk to us, those are fantastic. The pay per call transfer, you know, click to call model, where we maybe don't know the provenance of the lead, those are a lot tougher for us to really accept. Just because who knows where that lead was generated and if it was compliant and who called it and whose behalf they called it on, right? There's just a myriad of compliance issues that crop up. So those are tricky, but you know, from a fraud review standpoint, we use a speech analytics tool that writes down the transcript of every call that we have in the call center. And so those, we have some filters that bubble up certain things that are problematic. You know, talk times are certainly part of that. We also added a disposition. IT just called it who dis. And so when we call someone and they're like, yeah, no, that's the wrong person, or I don't know who the hell you are, those roll up into a report and we generally want to return those. So we can't tell in advance, but if you talk to someone and you get that data, you know, it also, we see a lot of trends by vendor. So I have a vendor I'm thinking of who their percentage of calls where we call and we talk to someone the same day and they're like, yeah, I already took care of it. Don't, I'm cool. It's
Right.
way out of line with everybody else. And so
Yeah.
you're like, well, okay, like what are the odds that in 1 hour somebody's already closed a deal with someone else after they filled out a lead with us? It
That's, yeah,
seems a
not
little bit out
likely.
of whack. So we
Yeah.
try to build in thresholds of what we think are reasonable. We also have some lead scoring models that tell us sort of based on disposition and age of the lead and other data that we've appended, maybe a score for like sales efficacy, not just like a lead score for marketing, but it tells us a little bit more about, okay, like what's the aggregate of their leads today? How good are they based on our estimation of all these different data points? And that gets us pretty close to, I think, where we want to be.
Yeah. So, the other item that you had brought up was, you know, the contact strategy, with leads in general. And you've seen it all. I mean, prior to Protect America, you were an active prospect, which worked with, you know, companies all over, across multiple verticals and all this sort of stuff. So it's, I can't imagine that. Well, I guess there's probably some nuances to contact strategy per vertical, but
Sure.
how are you guys seeing sort of the follow up and the contact strategy sort of evolve, with regards to text messaging, you know, like you sort of alluded to earlier with all these different channels of messaging?
Yeah, I mean, the goal for us is to just kind of be as omni-channel as the customer wants. You know, I mean, certainly you can probably relate that your inbox is probably full of messages that are unread, but your text box probably is not. So, you know, we want to be accessible to
Mhm.
however customers want to reach us. I don't think we're quite perfect at that yet, right? We're working on evolving into a full-fledged contact strategy that gives everyone everything that they need. But, you know, in the meantime, we just want to be accessible. So if somebody doesn't want to talk right now, they want to schedule something later, we want to help them do that more efficiently. You know, if they want to communicate via email, we want to be able to allow that, right? Because some contact centers maybe aren't great at that. So we want to really be able to help people get what they need through whatever medium that is that they're interested in.
Yeah. Do you guys, is your contact center in-house, or is that something that is distributed across different vendors, or?
It's here in Austin, Texas.
Got it. So that's got to be, I mean, that whole, I guess it makes it maybe a little bit easier for you guys that you can sort of silo the training and what your process is and all this sort of stuff versus outsourcing it to somebody that has, groups doing multiple different things. But even then, when to text, when to message, all these sorts of different things, I would imagine can be hard to train and build a process for in a contact center.
Yeah, I don't think we've cracked the code by any means, but I think
Yeah.
we're constantly learning and evolving based on customer feedback and trying to understand not just what converts, but what actually pleases and satisfies the consumer. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, we want to close deals and become as large of a company as we can, but in that process, we want to help consumers, and so we don't want to do something that like maybe is high converting that pisses off 80% of your prospects.
Yep.
So I think there's definitely a balance to keep in terms of how to contact people in a way that doesn't overwhelm them.
Okay, so tell me about your. Let's help some lead buyers out for a moment. Tell me about your process with vetting new lead sources. How do you identify, where you want to put money into and where you don't? Because, one of the things in the premise for a lot of what I've done in the past was based on my experience as a lead buyer, and at the time, in the mid 2000s, there were tons of mortgage guys, mortgage lead sellers out there doing all the same thing. And you never really knew what was going on until you spent money and you found out that they were lying or leads were coming from somewhere else, or even they were coming from the same lead source you bought. It was just so today, I saw you, I think last year, interviewing a ton of different companies at a conference and just doing different things.
Sure.
How do you go about today sort of evaluating new lead sources, and how do you pull the trigger?
Yeah, I hadn't. So there's a lot of different ways, and it depends on who's a good fit and the vertical. I will say, like, one thing I learned a lot at Active Prospect is part of our goal is to help this whole ecosystem to grow of lead gen. I know we've treaded on this a little bit, but you go to talk to some of these big brands that aren't in the main three verticals, and you're like, hey, have you guys ever tried lead gen? And they go, yeah, we tried it, we got screwed, so we just put that money into paid search and TV, and we're not going back. And so that activity shrinks the size of the lead gen industry, right? It makes things worse because people get a bad experience and then they bail, right? And so we always joked about doing either a conference session or a coffee table book just called How I Got Screwed, and it would just be stories of people getting messed up on a media buy. But I think a lot of buyers, it's difficult, and they can certainly lose their shirt because there's it's just a tricky process. But in terms of the vetting stuff, to get back to the actual question, we look at a lot of different things, and part of it is, as you said, it's provenance. It's like, okay, where do these leads actually come from? Do you have any traffic? And there's a lot of tools to manage that, right? Just in terms of like a SimilarWeb or an SEO Rush to look at traffic. We personally use Trusted Form to track where leads come from and how old they are. I find that to be very helpful. When I started, I found someone was sending us leads that were like 2.5 days old every time, and we're like, wait a minute, why are these leads aged? And there's no real satisfactory reason. It's like, I don't know, technical glitch. I will say, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, that if you bust a lead vendor for doing something they shouldn't be doing, you'll never get a satisfying answer. They'll never say, oh yeah, you got me. Like, good job. You caught us. All they'll ever say is like, that's weird. It must be a marketing partner or technical glitch. I'll go talk to the marketing team. But
we'll look into it. Yeah, look into it. Never hear back from you.
We'll shut off that sub ID for sure. So, I think that's tricky. And so, one metric I think is really interesting is just, I can't remember the numbers. I had it prepped for the session at the conference, but I think an interesting metric is the percentage of marketers at a company, right? So you look at some of these companies and you see, there's 15 employees and maybe one of them is like a junior marketing person, and like, well, that seems a little light, and then if you want to go look at like an agency, go look at any of the big brands out there, go look at like Leo Burnett, and there's like 100-to-1 ratio of like marketers to salespeople, and so like,
yes.
Okay, they have people in marketing, right? And so if it's just like it's a one guy company who doesn't have a website that you can find and can't point you to where they generate their leads, that's a problem, right? So table stakes for us is a lot of provenance, right? Like, Do you have a real traffic source that you own? Is it compliant? And does it appear to have any real volume, right? So there
Yeah.
are a lot of companies that will slap up a form that looks great, but doesn't have any traffic because that's not where the leads come from. So, we ask a lot of questions, probably more than most, to really kind of drill down on that. Because we also find like the pitch from most vendors is very similar. It never
Right.
varies. Whether their traffic is good or bad, it's the same pitch. Whether they have real traffic or not, it's the exact same pitch. So as a buyer, you really need to learn how to ask the right questions and drill down into figuring out, okay, is this person for real or not? And how can we verify that before we sign a contract and test these leads out?
Yeah, so it's like so you get you're basically you get all the assets, you request the assets from them, and then you verify whether or not those assets are actually getting. It's funny because you brought up SCM Russia. It's been such a long time that I looked at that, but that was one of the tools that I would use too. I think when they first sort of came out, was you'd able to go. It was free, I think, back then too,
Okay, nice.
where you could go in and say, and they go, yeah, they give you their landing pages. You go in there and check landing page. You're like, there's like zero listing, and they're trying to tell you that it's all organic search, and they're not even ranked, for a keyword.
Yeah.
And you ask them these questions like, well, where's this organic traffic coming from? It's not even
Right.
ranked. And they get completely
Right.
confused and like no
So
idea what to do.
I had a pitch last week, I think over LinkedIn. Somebody reached out like, hey, we're big in home security. We work with all these brands.
Yeah.
Great. Send me your domain. Send me your assets. And it's a website that somebody else owns. Like, okay, well, I could just, if I wanted to get on that site, I could call those guys myself. I don't need a broker for that. And also the site is not compliant, so we're not going to buy from there anyway.
Yeah.
So you find a lot of that. I think one thing I think is interesting is I was reading, I think last year I read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Say what you will about him, but he had an interesting point about monopolies where he says when a company is a monopoly, they try to pretend like they aren't. So if you look at Google, they're like, hey, we're not 90% of search traffic. We're only 20% of marketing spend. See, we're not that big at all. And then companies without a monopoly do the opposite. They try to act bigger than they are. And in our industry, instead of monopoly, I think that's transparency, right? I think everybody tells me how transparent they are. We're so transparent, but almost nobody does it, right? Because it's good for business. Everybody uses that same pitch, but I can count on one hand the vendors that I think are actually transparent and will show me the stuff that I really want to see.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that's really lip service. I think it's just never going to be quite as transparent as you want it to be. And I think, it's difficult for buyers to manage because there's so many different moving parts. And you look at, it's not a total fair fight with a lot of folks that work at big brands because they're not really from the space. And these lead vendors are much more sophisticated and know the industry a lot better. And I think that makes it sort of a disadvantage for some folks on the buy side. Not everybody, but, I think it's pretty easy to get, stuck in a bad situation or buying from a place that you shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot about like used cars. When you talk about buying a new car, you drive it off the lot, it loses a bunch of its resale value. And the interesting question is like, why is that? And when you look at the data, it's because there's an information advantage, right? The seller knows more about this car than the buyer. Even with a Carfax, I know if I took care of it or my daughter ran it into a tree, and you don't know that. So the price is going to be depressed. And I feel that way about leads too, right? The person selling the lead knows way more than the person buying the lead about where it came from, how interested it is, whether it's valid or not, right? The source knows way more than the buyer. And so there's always going to be some intrinsic difference in how that gets paid for and how that gets compensated.
Yeah, that's a really, really good analogy. I like that, Ryan. And that's why, companies like Active Prospect and Jornaya and whoever, are sort of opening those doors for transparency and okay, where really did this lead originate with trusted form, and figuring out how long, when, all the factors around what that Carfax, that lead ID, whatever it is, really is, says.
Yeah, and I think again, it's nothing's perfect. We're still going to have issues, and people are always going to try to game whatever systems you put into place. But I think, as a company, we want to do the best job we can at building out that funnel and being as intelligent as we can. So
Yeah.
We never want to be overly aggressive and filter out maybe a lead that is good, but we want to get as close to that line as possible, where we're not, hitting our call center with things that just aren't real.
Yeah. So with 40 plus or minus vendors driving traffic calls, whatever, leads, data leads, all these different sources, you walk into the office, what are you pulling up like your graph? What are you looking at to get a pinpoint? And just and maybe it's not even in the morning, maybe it's like noon, you know. When do you sort of look at your numbers? Is it up on your screen right now as we're
Yeah.
talking? So,
Yes,
yeah.
it is.
So how do you, what are, without giving, too much, but what are sort of the key things that you like, key indicators that you kind of look at on a regular basis just to see, keep a finger on the pulse of quality?
Yeah, so you know, we have a lot of different data and a lot of ways to render that, but I'll give you the best one, or the most immediate is just being in the same place as our call center.
Yeah.
So if the contact rate's not good, or the conversion rate's not good, or any the credit level for the day is not good, I'm definitely going to hear about it in person. So that's pretty effective. But we also do, I look a lot at our lead conduit dashboard in terms of what's happening with the leads. We have an internal report that we pull daily that shows, that's sort of refreshed automatically, that shows like contact rate, conversion rate, a bunch of different data broken out by source for the day, for that day's leads. So we look at aggregate of weekly, monthly, all that sort of stuff, but really daily and hourly for us is critical because, we're staffing, we're trying to manage the sales floor, we're trying to do a lot of different things and manage the lead volume along with that. So we're really looking pretty much in real time. And then our team also has these like automated reports that go out every hour. So it's kind of hard to ignore this,
Yeah.
to be honest. And if something's not working or is out of order, then we just kind of go drill down on that and figure out what we can analyze and maybe what might be happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. So so Lead Conduit is a lead management platform distribute. Tell me about that and how you guys use it.
Yeah, so we use Lead Conduit to manage all of our host and post partners, and then also we use it for a lot of data services. So when a lead comes in, whether it's from a partner or whether it goes through our affiliate site, that lead gets posted to Lead Conduit and sort of standardized, normalized, runs it through a bunch of different scoring models. It appends additional data to help the call center, and then it gets delivered in real time to our CRM in-house. And then that triggers our dialer to call the lead and sends out an email and goes through the whole contact funnel. But really, that just kind of helps me look a little bit at volume and trends, and I can see, what leads are getting sort of stopped and how each traffic source is doing. And then on the conversion side, I use those internal reports to kind of look at our quality score and how those leads are indexing.
So Lead Conduit has some different rules because you said how many leads are getting stopped. So it's filtering out some of the volume to some extent.
A little bit. It's filtering out really anything with like a fake phone number or,
Okay.
It's from a non-approved site. It doesn't have the right TCPA disclosure. It's a known litigator. There's a variety of different things, and we try not to be too aggressive on our filters. We try to loosen those up as much as we can. But yeah, if you put in a 555 number, it's not going to go to my call center.
Sure,
right?
sure.
It's going to get held up in queue, and so that just helps us to QA leads a little bit and make sure we're not sending things or even duplicates, right? We don't, if somebody just filled out a form, we don't want to send that same lead in twice. And so those get stopped in Lead Conduit. We just kind of keep an eye on that to make sure, nothing's wrong, right? Nothing's failing all the leads or, something happened catastrophic, but also just kind of look at what the trends are in terms of who's duping against who and like, what are the trends? It is something potentially broken, or is a vendor sending me the wrong thing and it's getting flagged? So we just kind of look at it as like a daily kind of QA to make sure things are running smoothly.
So are you seeing any another topic here? Are you seeing anything the crazy stuff that used to happen back in the mid 2000s, the LG technology stories? Are you hearing and seeing some of that stuff these days too with newer or younger companies? And so let's just take a step back. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen in these 15 years of lead gen from your experience?
That's a loaded question. Crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, I think you probably know one of them that makes my certainly top two or three. Yeah, I mean, when I
top two or three. You mean
no,
there's another one that's
listen, we can talk about all of it. Some of this is covered by an NDA, but I definitely went and worked somewhere where my boss at the time, unbeknownst to me, had embezzled $1 million, stolen intellectual property, and created a competing company at the same time. That was interesting. And then eventually, as you know, that person ended up allegedly murdering their business partner. So I think that's probably number one for me, I would say. I can't verify that happens at other lead gen companies.
Yeah, let's hope not. Let's hope not. Yeah.
So no, I don't know about that. I think that's pretty extreme on the level of crazy and what happens at places. But I mean, there's certainly some interesting things that occur. But yeah, nothing on that scale that I'm aware of.
Well, let me tell you. So that so the real question, I guess, is: do you think lead gen from a buyer's perspective is getting I don't know if I want to say cleaned up. I don't, more mature, because, we all, 10 years ago, we knew the companies that were doing fraud.
Sure.
We heard these stories out there. Obviously this crazy story where, somebody created a side company was funneling off leads. And then, that is just, outlandish story.
Yeah.
And that's obviously nowhere near normal
Sure.
for anything. But the question, you have been around the block, you've seen, especially experienced from active prospects, seeing so many different things go on and being at the source of when leads are generated and all that kind of stuff. Now you're on the buy side, buying from tons of different lead sources. Is relative fraud, I guess, or whatever it is, the same, better? I mean, are we getting better at sort of this thing called lead buying and lead gen?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I think there's so many more safeguards in place now that it's more difficult to be fraudulent. It's not impossible. I would probably twist your words a little and say that the fraud industry is getting more mature, getting a little better at what they do, right? So
yeah,
I would hazard a guess that like the overall lead quality in the industry is definitely going up, and that's a trend that's probably been going on for roughly 10 years, right? As things evolve and people get more sophisticated in these practices, but there are still people out there. I think it's probably more gray than black and white, right? I think you're less likely to have a source that is one is white hat and one is black hat. I think you're probably more likely to just find some stuff mixed in with high quality leads because that's how the incentives work, right? We pay largely on a cost per lead basis, and that incentivizes people to not always have conversion in mind, right? So they want to, conversely, there are a lot of companies that want to hit our cost per acquisition, but no lower, right? So they want to get 99.9% of the budget that's acceptable for us to spend on a sale. And so as much as they can balance that out to help their margins, they're going to do that. And I understand that and I can appreciate that. And our goal is to try to find some middle ground there.
Yeah, I mean, because I think there's a point, where buyers and advertisers don't fully understand what it takes to generate a lead. Hence, they go out and work with third parties to do it for them to some extent, and don't know the mechanics and the costs behind it. And it's not to say that these lead gen companies don't make, a ton of money, but margins fluctuate, things change. There's a lot of moving parts that go into driving good quality leads or whatever quality it is.
No, I think it's very difficult. And I having been on the sell side and the middleware side and also the buy side, like I totally appreciate that. It is really hard to generate good leads. And, buyers,
not only that, it's expensive.
Yeah, it is expensive, right? And buyers can be hard to work with, right? They can be capricious with their budgets and their processes and their practices. And it's very difficult to manage that as a vendor. So I get it. I've certainly been there myself. But that's not to say that then we could just kind of turn a blind eye to fraudulent behavior. So it's definitely a balancing act. One way I kind of think about the lead gen space, I think of it sometimes in terms of like farming, right? So our affiliate funnel, the one we want to build at Protect America, is really farm to table. I want to meet the farmer. I want to shake their hand, and I want to see their plot of land and see what's growing. And I want to go do regular inspections. That doesn't scale for everybody, right? But you also get to some point where you're like, hey, I've maxed out my 40 acres. So if I want to make more money, I need to either buy more land and till it and grow it. And it may not even work, right? I might lose my shirt on it. or I can buy some produce from this guy down the street and sell it as if it was my own, right? And so, whether that's above board or not, I think people are always going to look for ways to grow their business, and it doesn't always do it in the way that I would want them to, right? So as you scale that out, does a lead vendor use the same scrutiny that we use on their source? Maybe yes, maybe no, probably not. So you're always going to be getting an expanding level of traffic from different places that, who knows where it comes from.
Yeah. And I guess that's the real trick, is finding scalable marketing channels, right? And it becomes, I think a brand or a website, whatever it is, has a a ceiling. You just can't, you're just not going to be able to generate the amount of traffic or leads that you want to consume to continue to grow your business or even gain market share by potentially
Right.
having one channel, I guess.
Well,
Right.
yeah, there's
I guess
always
you
this.
could argue that to some extent too, but
No, I mean, like let's just take paid search. We can run paid search to a point where it then becomes unprofitable, right?
right.
We can't spend $100 billion on paid search, like probably not efficiently. Or if
Yeah.
we did, it would destroy my call center with the volume, right? So
Yeah.
there's always some cap of where things can run efficiently. I think that's fair, right? There's always going to be some maximum, some cutoff of every source, and so then you figure out, okay, where else can we broaden? What's the conversion rate and the cost that we can allow on each different sort of channel? Yeah, so I think that's definitely true, but our job sort of as marketers and as affiliates is to sort of manage and hedge that risk across all of those channels where we're hitting the right volume and KPIs across 10 or 20 different mediums of lead generation.
Yeah. So you guys, one of the big questions or goals with lead buyers is I want to get away from the third party vendors and really just generate to my own page and my own traffic and do this all on my own. And the reality is you need, there's probably some level of balance there that is required to get the scale and hit the numbers and everything that you need. It sounds like that's kind of what you guys do. You have your own internal campaigns and then you're balancing it with vendors as well. Is the goal to try to always produce more on the internal side versus the vendors? How do you guys sort of approach that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, always we want to grow all the channels that are efficient. We would grow them up to sort of that ceiling where they become less productive. But
Yeah.
yeah, so every month when we look at our budgeting, we look at our total marketing budget, and part of that is allocated to me to work through our partners, and part of that is for paid and organic and our dealer program, different sort of channels. So we really want to maximize how many sales and how many leads of a certain quality that we can get for those dollars. And so, if the affiliate volume is going up and it's efficient, and maybe we back it off on another channel, or if paid is going great and we're slowing down certain things, we can shift budget back and forth. So really it's partially just about being as productive as we can and then keeping the call center as efficient as possible.
Great. So lucky enough to have you speaking at Lead Generation World in January.
Yes,
And I really appreciate the support and participation in that show.
absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, and I'm sure you don't have, we're 3.5, 4 months out. Well, it's going to be here before you know it. A little scary to
Sure.
say.
Yeah.
But you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about.
Great. Yeah. So it's actually a lot of the stuff we've sort of been talking about. It's a lot of just sort of a practical guide to buying leads. So a lot of the different processes and practices and technologies, and basically just a lot of how we do what we do for folks that maybe either are newer to buying leads or maybe just want a refresher or want to learn something. So you and I have also talked a lot, and I'm very excited for this conference because over the years, I've basically stopped going to content sessions because I found them not very valuable. And so the goal is really to give a lot of actionable advice on what people can do to take back to their jobs and be more productive, right? And better run a lead buying operation, whether that's your full-time job or that's just something that sort of people are dabbling in, but basically getting a better understanding of the industry, sort of the upsides and some of the traps you can fall into, and really learning how to run that efficiently. So, in the X amount of years in lead gen, I've helped process upwards of 1 billion leads and, worked in a lot of different industries and seen a lot of stuff, worked with buyers and sellers and sort of been on both sides. So I really just want to take that information and put that into a digest that people can use to be more efficient.
I love it. I love it because, that at its core, and it goes back to what I already said, is really trying to help people sort of navigate this ecosystem and your experience. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a couple other people that have the level of experience you have from the different points of view, and that are really in the weeds on volume of buying leads and seeing what's going on there. So I think the session is going to be really, really great. And I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you to make sure it's
Well,
good.
I've been working on it, so we got.
But yeah, no, I look forward to that. I think that's going to be a really, really great system. And it's vertical agnostic too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it really applies to any vertical: solar, education,
absolutely.
mortgage, whatever it is.
Yeah, it could be anything. And I mean, it's interesting. We've probably discussed this in the past, but one of the interesting things working in the middleware space is we found all these different verticals that I'd never seen represented at industry shows, right? So we work with folks who are diapers or tobacco or SaaS, and like all these different things that aren't represented by the big three or whatever people want to call those verticals. And they all have the same challenges. I mean, the industry is a little bit different and the data you're going to use is a little bit different, but ultimately we're all just trying to get better leads and turn those into sales. And so, I think there's a lot of universal truths about how to do that. The details might vary a little bit, but it's a lead is a lead to some extent.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to thank you for joining me here for we could probably do this all day and keep talking, but we do have to get back to our day jobs.
Nobody would listen. Yeah, we got to.
It's okay. But if someone want to get hold of you, you're at Ryan Pombrio on LinkedIn, and then your last name, and I'll put it up on the site here. But it's POMBRIO, and then of course Ryan. Everybody should know how to spell, and they can figure it out on LinkedIn at Protect Them. If they want to contact you or reach out, just connect, whatever.
Yeah,
try to sell you leads. Ryan buys a lot of leads, everybody.
Of course. Yeah, well, yeah, he also refuses a lot of leads. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest. I try to be as responsive as I can. But if there's anything I can help with or information, we're trying to do that. So definitely very excited for the conference. I'm really glad you put this thing together. I think it's going to be great.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Ryan. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mike.